Hey guys, welcome to one of my first live videos here as Bigger Hearts, Deeper Minds. This is actually a live video that's going to be cut up into smaller podcast episodes and posted probably through Bcast, potentially on YouTube as well. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I hope everyone's having a good morning. I'm just driving here and figured it would be the perfect time to do some podcasting for Bigger Hearts, Deeper Minds. So let's go ahead and get into it. There's a lot on my mind, as I'm sure is on the minds of anyone watching this as well. And especially if you follow politics, it's been an insane year, as we know. Everything from COVID and the Delta variant to Afghanistan, inflation. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But let's go ahead and get into it. First, I want to talk about Afghanistan and just some thoughts that I've had ever since the whole really humanitarian crisis that's unfolded over the last couple days in Afghanistan and is still ongoing. It's not like it's over by any means, but there's so many dimensions here. So first, I just want to say that obviously, if you're probably older than, 25, you're very familiar with 9/11, which is coming up in a couple days. Obviously, if if you're younger, you probably still know about 9/11, but not in the same way that other people do. I remember being let out of school early that day, and my parents talked to me about what happened later, and it was pretty intense. Obviously, it was one of the worst days in this nation's history, as well as it's really bad for other countries as well. But obviously, we all know why we got involved, why the U.S. got more involved in Afghanistan. We had been involved in, that part of the world before, but certainly nothing to the extent that we did after 9/11. And, Saddam Hussein was a really bad person, and he caused a lot of violence and, division, and that situation needed to be dealt with no matter what. We can't, terroristic threats on anyone's life is a grave danger, and so we can't allow real terrorists to be marauding around and causing violence and bloodshed and political mayhem. That being said, I don't believe we should have, as a country, I don't believe we should have ever been involved in Afghanistan in the way that we were. Being someone who definitely leans libertarian, and would consider myself libertarian many times, I don't believe that it's our job as a country to involve ourselves in anyone else's political or economic or social business. We have a different culture here in the U.S. than the Afghanis do. We're very different people. We have different cultures. We have different norms. We have different economic and political structures. It's not the United States' job to be the policeman of the world. It's never been our job to do that, and yet sadly, we have done that so many different times. We've done that in Vietnam. We've done that in Europe. We've done that all across the board for decades and decades. And many people if you study U.S. history, you study politics and geopolitical movement, you would know how deeply the U.S. has been involved in so many other things. We've always sought to stamp out things that we disagree with wherever we disagree with them. We also invade countries for, minerals and resources and commodities that we don't have or can't produce or don't want to produce here in the States. I firmly believe that that's never been our business. We should have never been involved in so many of the things that we've been involved in, and we've paid the price. We've had millions of civilian casualties throughout the years. There are so many things that we've done wrong in the name of justice or trying to find, things to stamp out or just saying, we have to end, whatever it is. But I just wanted to say that I firmly believe that we've never had good intentions to be there. We've always sought oil and, things that belong to other countries. We create division, we create the problem, and then we swoop in with the solution. And that is never a good thing. it's interventionist, it's selfish, it's domineering, it's, like I said, it's policing the world. So I wholeheartedly and firmly believe that we should have never been in Afghanistan as long as we were, and I think it's a good thing that we are getting out as quickly as we possibly can. Now, that being said, I don't believe that the way the exit was handled was appropriate. Clearly, if it's our job to protect someone, even if we're there for the wrong reasons, if we have been assigned the responsibility to protect people and protect a nation, we need to do that. We do need to fight against bad forces. We need to fight against any militant extremist group. That just needs to be a reality. We can't leave when there's human lives on the line. We have to take responsibility. We have to be the protectors that we can be. Not necessarily that we're supposed to be, but that we can be. So I don't believe that the situation was handled well. I don't believe the situation was handled wisely or intelligently. If Joe Biden's intelligence on the ground had answers and had information that he was not taking advantage of as commander-in-chief, that's a grave danger right there. We need, in situations like this, even if we're not responsible for fixing a problem or providing every solution, we need to be responsible for what we're responsible for. There's no other way around it. Add to that the fact that people are fleeing for their lives and trying to run away from a crisis and, keep themselves protected. That's all you can ever ask of someone. You can't ask, individuals to change the course of a nation or defeat a political upheaval. You can't do that. All you can do is expect people to be responsible for their own lives, their own families, and to some extent their own country. But for the most part, most people are just going to fight for their own lives and defend their own lives, and I think that's completely acceptable. What's not good is leaving people out to dry and letting them, basically fight to get on airplanes and risk dying just to get out of a country. That is never going to go well. So it's a massive humanitarian crisis out there. There are obviously thousands of Americans. There still are thousands of Americans in Afghanistan. There are people who had nothing to do with how this situation unfolded, who have their lives, some of their freedoms, they have everything on the line. They're being forced to fight for everything they know, and in a matter of probably less than a few hours, I would imagine. Someone's honking behind me because they want me to go. I rarely turn right on red unless I am in a rush to do something. All right, sorry about that. So yeah, there's men, women, and children who are now fleeing. They had to leave, they had to leave their homes overnight, and they're trapped. They're doing everything they can to get out of it. I'm just heartbroken by this terrible crisis that's been thrust upon people at the last minute. I can't imagine dealing with that. I've never dealt with anything remotely close to that in my entire life. Things that happened last summer in the US look tame compared to everything that they're dealing with out there. So if you are one to pray, I ask you to join me in prayer for the people who are out there suffering and fighting for their lives. I won't be praying right now. I'll be praying separately, but it's a really bad situation out there, and all that someone can do is hope that things get better. Send resources if you're able to, make donations to companies that are doing good things out there. Do everything you can to be a part of helping people if it's possible. All right, let's move forward into the next topic. So something else that I've been thinking a lot about is, especially during COVID times, how can you be staying up on the news and consuming content regularly without overwhelming yourself, falling into a rabbit hole, or, just not thinking for yourself, I guess. And one of the biggest things that I've found that helps me is take specific times out of the day to consume content. Don't consume content all day, because if all you're doing is reading the news constantly, number one, you're going to be overwhelmed. But number two, you're going to probably start to hate the world and to hate life. It's not easy to be just consuming news all day. It's mentally exhausting. You start reading things about inflation and the Fed and banking and crime and people who are being politically sassy with each other, to put things very mildly, and congressional decisions being made. It just goes on and on. There's no way to ever get to a point where you'll know everything that's going on. So you should consume content specific times throughout the day, and just give yourself a break. Allow yourself to be mentally refreshed by something else. Don't take it upon yourself to feel the burden of consuming content all day. It's not something that anyone can do and ever feel ultimately wiser or better for it. It doesn't mean you'll be ill-informed. In fact, you'll probably be very well informed. But what's difficult about news consumption all day is it forces you to forget everything else that's important in life. And so by that I mean relationships, work, family, relaxation, health, spiritual growth. These are all things that are antithetical to the news. The news is always going to depress you to some degree, just because of the messed up and fragile and, terrible world that we live in. Now, I stay informed because I want to know what's coming down the pipeline. I want to be prepared for things that will happen next, but I'm not going to consume the news to enrich myself or to necessarily learn more about the subject. It's more checking in periodically to see what's going on, and just to understand what's coming next. What should I be looking out for? How can I prepare myself for that? The next thing I would recommend in how you listen to the news and consume fresh content like that is pick a couple trusted sources. Pick 3 to 5 sources where you'll get most of your news from. The reason I say this is because not only are most, news sources out there biased and corrupt, and they're just going to be peddling opinion when they should be sharing news, is, when you are able to find unbiased news sources, you're going to get the information that other people probably wouldn't tell you, but that you need to hear anyways. Because that really is the news. The news isn't the information that you want to hear in the way that you want to hear it. It's what's going on right now, whether or not you realize it and whether or not you agree with it. So I'm going to share a couple sources of my own for people that either are looking for unbiased news sources or at least minimally biased news sources. And then, people who have tried that already, but it didn't go so well, and they're looking for other sources that they can trust. So allsides.com, that's ALLSIDES.com, Allsides. They specifically curate and pull news from all across the spectrum. So and they will rate the news based on what their leaning is. So you'll see stuff like Fox News will be on the right. You'll see things like CNN will be on the left. You'll see things like Reuters and USA Today and Axios, stuff like that is more centered. You'll also see things like the Epic Times and Reason and the New York Times, Los Angeles Times. You'll see Washington Post. So the point is, they're going to give you all these major and smaller news sources. They're going to tell you what their political leanings are, what their news bias is. They're also going to give you their own report, and you can sign up to support them monthly. I think for as little as $5 a month. There's probably bigger packages too if you're interested in that. But what I really like about All Sides is I can see exactly what's going on all sides. I can see what the left is saying, I can see what the right is saying, and then what I typically read is the center, because I don't really care what the left or the right is saying. I might on occasion, or I might to see, if it's laugh-worthy, but I'm not going to read something that, I'm not going to read something from the left or from the right on the basis of this is correct and this is what I should be reading more of, because I know that they're not going to be giving me the full story. Another one that I've really been using a lot recently, and it's very similar to All Sides, but it gives you more coverage percentages, is Ground News. That's GROUND News, Ground News. There's a site and an app similar to All Sides. You have to pay to be a premium member and get their full coverage benefits and the full range of content that they offer. But you get to see, what percentage of the left, center, and right is covering a particular element or a particular news story, and then go from there. You can also save these things to Pocket, and Medium is another good reading app. Medium is a little bit broader than just a news app, but yeah, I really like what these apps are doing. I will be honest, I go to sites like Intellectual Takeout and Reason. I'm trying to think, I've started to read Axios a little bit more. They're pretty good with their coverage. I often feel like Axios is giving me just the facts and very little spin, if any. And I try to start broad and then go down from there. And it's really important to have those unbiased news sources. You can see what other people are thinking and saying about a particular topic, but then it gives you the chance to think what you think about it. And that's what brings me to my next point is it's important to consume news, but it's important to reflect on it as well. I firmly believe that you can't fully understand the news, you can't fully see things in context unless you take some time to reflect. And if you aren't taking time to reflect, then you're really just thinking what other people think about things. It's important to have a worldview in which to consume news, because if all you're doing is consuming news and you're not understanding it in the context of a worldview, then what that comes down to is everything you see is just essentially random. We never know what direction things are heading in the world. If we have a worldview, which basically you can sum up a worldview in a couple questions. A worldview is, where did we come from? What is the purpose of life? Where are you going? And what happens after you die? And if you can answer all of those questions, then those answers are your worldview. If you can't answer those questions, it either means that you're being dishonest with yourself and you know what your worldview is, but you're not admitting it to yourself, or you haven't done research to understand what your worldview is. So that's why it's so important, because the worldview I have dictates the way I understand everything else that's happening. Now, obviously, what I'm not trying to say is that there's always going to be things that happen in the world that you don't understand why it's happening or why it's happening now. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is it's important to understand the direction that the world is heading. And if you don't have that personal worldview for yourself, everything that's happening in the world, you're just going to be subjected to it. You're not going to have a firm sense of, I understand the world is going this way with monetary policy or economics or socio-cultural issues. You're not going to understand those in the terms of worldview. You're just going to see, why is all this chaos happening? Why are all these bad things happening? And so, yeah, firm up your worldview, figure out what you believe, why you believe it, because if you don't, you're just subjecting yourself to mass chaos. Another thing I wanted to talk about was future election stuff. I watch politics closely, as people who watch this show understand. I think we're going to see some of the most unprecedented things in the next couple of years for U.S. elections that we have in a while. I mean, number one, I think the 2020 U.S. presidential election obviously changed the viewpoint that a lot of people have on that. I think a lot of people have lost faith based on several different opinions that have come out about the state of the U.S. 2020 presidential election. I think people who did believe in Biden and did see him as their champion, some people have definitely been disillusioned. There's only about 31 to 32% of independent voters approve of the job that Joe Biden has been doing as president. There is a very low approval rating of Joe Biden as a whole. I think it's somewhere around 41 to 42%. Something like something like 90+% of Democrats approve of the job that Joe Biden is doing. Something like 94, 96%, somewhere around there, of Republicans disapprove of the job that Joe Biden is doing, which obviously both of those are not surprising. Independents and Republicans believe that the U.S. economy is doing poorly right now. I would share that view. Inflation has probably never been worse in the U.S.'s history, at least as far as I'm concerned. Certainly not. It's certainly never been this bad in my lifetime. Most Democrat voters believe that the U.S. economy is doing fine, which also isn't surprising because when you have someone in the White House who is on your side and, your leader is in the victory chair, then it's not surprising at all that you would think that things are doing well. But I think, there's a lot of people who still support Trump. I don't support Trump or Biden, and I voted for neither of them. I would never vote for either of them. But I think we're going to see some really interesting things happen in the next couple of years. I could honestly see, I really don't think that Biden or Kamala would win another term. I could honestly see Trump winning it. I could see someone else winning it. I don't think it's likely that an independent candidate or the libertarian candidate, whoever ends up being nominated, I don't think it's likely that that would happen, despite the fact that Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen received the second highest amount of libertarian U.S. presidential votes ever. I think the first highest was Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. I did vote for them and Joe Jorgensen and Spike in this last, most recent presidential election round. Obviously, we would need way more than 1 million votes. We would need tons and tons more millions of votes to even get close to the possibility of a libertarian presidential candidate winning. Though I would say I would consider it a massive win if we could get libertarian visibility on presidential debates and just more media visibility in general. Obviously, that does depend on budget. Money talks. This is how the world works. Money is what moves the world forward. Money is how opportunities are opened. Money is how doors are opened to presidential issues and debates and things of that nature. It is not possible to make an impact without money. And if you don't have money yourself, you have to fundraise. You're not going to get money to just show up. And most people, I think the best candidates are the ones who are not going to accept, big campaign donors and corporate funding and things like that. Obviously, it does move you forward as far as raw visibility goes, but there's no question that Americans are clamoring for a viable third party. Something like an MSNBC poll a couple years ago, or actually I think just last year, said that 82% of Americans were considering voting for Joe Jorgensen. Now, obviously, 82% of voting Americans did not vote for Joe Jorgensen, and that worked out the way that it did. But it just goes to show that people are really desperate for change. They want something different. Naturally, people are going to go for the classic, quote-unquote, truism of vote for the lesser of two evils, at least in their eyes. Vote for what's ultimately more comfortable and familiar than what could bring about great change, but it's going to be completely different, or they don't want to have to justify it to their friends and family, or they want to be accepted by their friends and family, and so they'd rather vote for someone that the people that they like voted for, rather than voting for voting with their conscience, or just not voting at all. That's another big aspect of this. People feel like they have to vote. We call it things like you're performing your civic duty and doing things that, people seem to think are necessary, but nothing is ever really necessary. You just have to do what you believe in, and you have to do what your convictions tell you to do, even if that includes not voting. I fully believe that not voting, if that is what your values most closely align with, that is better than voting for someone who you don't believe in, or someone who you just want to crush the other guy. I genuinely believe that, there's millions of people who voted for Biden just to do an anti-Trump vote. I don't think that's an ethical decision. I don't think that's an honest decision. I think that if you are going to a restaurant just to, you know, not support another restaurant, you obviously can do that, but that's not exactly how it works. Plus, if there's more people who support the other restaurant that you're going against, the restaurant that you support will still get your money, but other people are still going to give money to the other restaurant. So it really depends on what is a successful restaurant appeal, what's a successful business model for that restaurant, and that's what's going to dictate everything else that we do. And yeah, so I think, Republicans and Democrats and of course Libertarians, Green Party, Independents, everybody, you always got to be hustling. There's no way to ever assume that just because you were in the White House recently, your party had power recently, that you're going to continue to do well. You always have to be getting out there, making your case known, winning over a variety of voters. Democrats consistently have to hit rural areas and the Midwest, which historically and still present day tend to be pretty red-leaning, pretty either independent or conservative. Democrats consistently have to hit those areas, and Republicans consistently have to speak to the crowds that are living in cities and tend to have higher education levels, tend to be working in different market sectors. So it completely depends on what problems you face, how you're going to solve them, what your budget is, the people that you have to reach, and the messaging that you use to reach them. It's no secret, especially for those who follow politics closely, that using messaging of a nature where, using messaging of a nature where you basically say, if a Trump ad campaign is like, Biden's going to be cracking down on guns and he's going to make sure that this country turns into a socialist nation overnight and there's going to be no more 2A, or on the flip side, Biden's talking about or to Trump supporters and saying had it the other way around. Talking to Biden supporters about Trump, Trump's going to be, cracking down on immigration and he's going to, he's trying to be a white supremacist and all this stuff, both of which are pretty extreme on both sides. Obviously, that type of political messaging works. It works to be able to tell people, don't vote for the other guy, vote for us, because if you vote for the other guy, you're going to get this bad result. And people would rather be safe, secure, and have familiar surroundings than vote for something that, that their conscience or values might tell them to vote differently on. So why do I say that? I say that because you have to be aware, you as a voter and just a citizen, you have to be aware of what types of messaging ploys people are using to try to get you, and to realize you have to do your own research to see if it's based in fact or if it's not based in fact. And then if you're a political activist, you're an organizer, you do anything, or someone who's trying to drum up support for your own message, your own vision and campaign, you have to understand how to reach people in a way that will emotionally speak to them, but not in a basis purely of emotion. You have to speak with fact, because I firmly believe that speaking with emotion, that's how you will grip people, that's how you will hook them in. But speaking with fact and consistency, that is how you will earn people's long-term respect and trust. And ultimately, people are going to make decisions based on emotion, but if that is the only system that you're using, the smarter people will eventually see through you. They will see how much you lie. They will see how much you are being dishonest. They will see how much you smear the other party just to try and get support for yourself. You can't expect people to support you long term if all you're doing is being dishonest. If all you're doing is saying, vote for me because I'm not them, that is not a winning argument. That is an argument that shows you are just trying to get support because you're the other side. Tell me what you believe in. Tell me what your arguments are. Tell me how you are going to make a better world, make a better country, make a better nation, enact better policies. Show me what you are going to do independently and thoughtfully. It's not enough just to say, yeah, vote for me because I'm not Trump, or vote for me because I'm not Biden. Because eventually people see through that, and what it often comes down to is kitchen table issues. So what are kitchen table issues? Well, it's anything that ultimately affects an individual or a family in their day-to-day life. So kitchen table issues would be, I lost my job, or, my son or daughter is in jail, or my car broke down and I don't have enough money to fix it, or my job or my company just outsourced jobs to a different country, and so, now this is happening, or there's a lot of crime in our neighborhood. Things that affect people in their day-to-day lives, things that affect the emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, financial health of someone's life. That is ultimately what is going to be most important to most people at the end of the day. Will there be people who have, are there single issue voters to this day? Yes, you can bet your bottom dollar that there are. There's always going to be people who are, pro-immigration, anti-immigration, pro-2A, anti-2A, pro-abortion, anti-abortion. There's always going to be people who vote on these issues and, make their thoughts known just by doing a single issue vote. But especially with, independents, people who do their own research, there's always going to be people who have more complex voting mechanisms and archetypes for themselves than just a single issue. I'm personally that way. Have I consistently voted Libertarian because it's the leading candidate that most closely aligns with my views? Yes, I have. But it's also the candidates that I feel would do the best job. I'm not just voting the party line. I'm not just voting Libertarian because it's Joe Jorgensen or it's Gary Johnson. And I am fully aware that there are many aspects of, all kinds of political candidates who are nowhere near perfect. We would be kidding ourselves if we thought any political candidate was perfect. You're never going to find political candidates who are so excellent that if we just got them into office that things are going to change. That's not how things work. There's so much congressional deadlock. The congressional system as we have it, especially now, it works so hard to make things difficult. They work so hard to make it nearly impossible to get real things done. There's literal reams and reams of paper, of laws, that are written every year. Huge budget packages, huge spending packages that are pushed through with little if any mainstream coverage. Typically the only time mainstream coverage will happen is if really bad things were happening, like the COVID bill. As they say, there's a lot of pork in it, which there was. I read part of it. It was, I believe, over 6,000 pages long, so I obviously didn't read the whole thing. I don't know who could have. There's tons of stuff that they're constantly trying to push through. They're constantly trying to make a subjugated class out of everyone else in America so that they can have more power. You can be arrested, imprisoned, or fined for essentially anything. People have to pay attention to this stuff and at least see what is going on, to understand what is my politician, what is my representative trying to push through now? In what way are they trying to limit my freedoms or take more money or speak for me in a way that I disagree with? No one speaks for you except for you. Always remember that. No one speaks for you except for you. You are an independent, autonomous individual. You can check us out on the web at biggerheartsdeeperminds.com. You can support the show by donating. There's a donate tab on our website where you can donate via Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. You can also sign up for our email list by sending a blank email to bhdm@bcast.email. Again, that's bhdm@bcast.email. Obviously, BHDM stands for Bigger Hearts, Deeper Minds. And I'm excited to be bringing content to you on a regular basis. Hopefully, I'll be able to bring more content to you in the near future. But let's keep going. So everything that has happened in politics for the last couple of years that's big, quote unquote big, like, issues that affect everyday people, I guess, or things that are at least talked about to some extent in the mainstream media, has made life worse for people. So everything big in politics that's happened recently has ultimately made life worse. So what do I mean by that? Well, a couple examples that we can talk about are inflation, technocratic power, algorithmic power, which is really important, overseas spending, so foreign aid to different countries, and taxation. So there's a lot there, but let's get into it. What many people don't know is that income taxation, the income tax, that was not always a thing. I don't remember exactly when it was first instituted, but it was first added relatively recently. We did not always have an income tax in the U.S. We fought tooth and nail. We left Great Britain. We fought tooth and nail to set up a brand new country where the people who created this country wanted people to be free and exercise autonomous control over their own lives outside of a top-down governmental power structure. And they also wanted people to be free to pursue a religious life outside of the power structure that they had known in their home country. So one thing that's really interesting to note as well about how this country got started is the founders of this country were definitely deists, if not Christians. There's no question that the people who created the country believed that the freedoms they were setting up were not just for anyone. They were for, in their own words, a moral and religious people. Now, obviously, they did not... They probably knew that this country was going to move to a place that would be not just not Christian at one point, but post-Christian. I mean, you could make the argument that those things are the same, but I'm sure they knew that things were always going to move in that direction. But what I would say is, I don't think they ever saw things going in a direction where the majority of the people in this country were not Christian. Now, you might be scratching your head and asking me, well, wait a minute, Brad, I thought most of the people in America are Christian. Well, most people in America say they're Christian, but that doesn't mean they are Christian. There's a lot of proof of that. We don't really have time or the structure to get into that now. But what I would say is, the freedoms that they set up, the founders of the country designed the freedoms to be used in a manner that people were responsible with. So what does that mean by it? Well, it means they designed freedom to be, someone is taking responsibility, but they're taking responsibility and making choices that ultimately don't infringe on other people's same freedoms and choices, but are done in a way that, how would I put this? You are not being irresponsible or reckless or overtly selfish with your choices. You're not making choices that infringe upon other people's freedoms. It essentially means you're living a value and morally driven life that understands that even if other people don't make the same choices you do, you're still going to do what's most responsible and most respectable for the situation that you're in. So obviously that's pretty intentionally vague, because you can't really pinpoint things and say, well, I'm gonna do whatever because I can. You can make that decision, but that's not necessarily a decision you should make. And so an example of a responsible decision would be, you earn a certain amount of money per month, and what should you be doing with that money? Well, ultimately, you should be using the money to cover your bills, hopefully have some money left over, but you shouldn't be living a life where you are debt-ridden and you're outsourcing most or all of your expenses to things that, ultimately don't bring value to your life, things that you have to pay back a lot more. You should be making responsible decisions with your money so that you can live within your means and create a world for yourself that doesn't put your responsibilities on someone else's back. You should also be making decisions that lead to a life where you understand your role in the community and your livelihood, and making decisions that support the community that you live in. You should not be making decisions that outsource the choices that you've made. So what does that look like in practical terms? Well, it means taking care of your health so that when you need to go to the hospital, you can be there as inexpensively and for as little time as possible. I think one of the biggest things that we struggle with as a country is we try to outsource our health to other people. We live in a world where we live in a country certainly where you can eat whatever you want. You can take whatever poor care of your health that you want, and there's a system around you that's going to pay for you instead of you being on the hook for your own decisions. So I firmly believe that we need to make healthcare a situation where everybody has affordable access to it, but you're on the hook for the decisions that you've made. So if you've lived a life where you've gained a lot of weight and you're consuming a lot of alcohol, you're putting a lot of toxins and bad things into your body, other people should not be on the hook for that. It should be you being on the hook for that. I think it does incentivize better behavior. Obviously, you can still have the freedom to make those decisions, and you should if you want to, if that's the kind of life that you want to lead. But it's not fair to put other people's responsibilities on you, and it's not fair to put your responsibilities on other people. So I hope that was a good analogy to some extent that describes, what the founders intended when they created this country. They wanted it to be an abundant place of opportunity for everybody. And by the way, they knew that they were using slave labor, and little to none of them wanted to do that. It was not ever meant to be a system that would perpetuate itself into the country. Obviously it did, and it did for way longer than we thought it would, and that even some people wanted it to. Slave labor of any kind was never meant in a free society, and I firmly stand against that for the rest of time. I will never support slavery in any form whatsoever. With the way that people created this country to be, it has to be a place where people take responsibility for themselves. The United States has to be a country where everything that most people support is being autonomous, making individual choices. I'm not opposed to certain kinds of social safety nets, but I believe that they have to be created voluntarily, and they can't be government run. Everyone wants to support other people. That's what nonprofits and volunteering and direct aid, that's what those things are for. It's not for government to do those things. We live in a society as well where values often dictate beliefs, and beliefs often dictate actions. So it's impossible to live in a society where people take responsibility for themselves if taking responsibility for yourself is not something that people value. If people value good things, they'll take good actions. If people don't value good things, they'll take bad actions, or they'll take actions that harm themselves and other people. If people don't even know what their values are, then that's even worse. So it all starts from a place of understanding your values, knowing what those are, why you believe what you believe, and then putting that into action. That is something that I will hopefully do a future podcast episode about. But for now, I'm just going to move on to other topics. Hopefully my video is still live here. It looks like I am, but hopefully it's still working out. Alright, so my GPS is getting a little bit weird here. Alright, so let's move on to the next topic. Taxation, income, things like that. So why are prices going up? Why is there so much inflation? Why is the monetary system so screwed, for lack of a better term? Well, it's because the United States is a country of spending. We don't know how to get ourselves out of an issue that is the United States government has always been spending our way out of things. Our currency, the dollar, is essentially the reserve currency. So what we do is we loan, we give out loans, we spend our way out to get out of problems, and we recoup it through various means. But ultimately, we spend, spend, spend. We're essentially a nation of spendocrats, and the government believes they can spend their way out of any issue. Well, money has to work. The monetary system has to go one of two ways. Either it's just like regular money and regular credit, where you can rack up your credit card, and ultimately you have to pay down that debt somehow. You can't just use credit forever because it'll run out. Or the monetary system has to fundamentally change, and what was used as currency previously is no longer used. And so we are in a situation where, for at least now, inflation has been the issue. Inflation has been the solution to the issue. So that means that instead of spending less, they're going to spend more, and things are just going to ultimately cost more. So what does that look like? Well, it basically means that the U.S. government has dropped trillions of dollars into the U.S. economy. We're trying to spend our way out of things again. We're trying to prop up systems, give businesses loans. We're trying to keep things going monetarily as best we can, because when you tell people essentially overnight that you can't go out and spend the way that you did before, you can't go on vacations, you can't run your business, you can't keep your restaurant open, well, there's going to be a lot less money in the economy. So in order to keep certain systems and programs functional, you have to artificially pump money into it. I am by no means a financial or economic expert, but this is how I understand things to be, because if you're artificially putting a bunch of money into a system, then at some point things are going to, if something becomes more common, if you have 10,000 cotton balls as opposed to 1,000, it's going to cost less because there's going to be so much supply that the demand is going to be low. And so when you're putting more money into the money supply, you are essentially creating a system where everything has to cost more. So in order to get the same value for the amount of money, the price has to go up. And that we've seen that with gas prices, we've seen that with food, we've seen that with housing. People wanted to move to different places of the country throughout the pandemic, and so it became a seller's market rather than a buyer's market. And because the supply changed so drastically, prices went way up. Corporations were buying houses and property more, but because everything was getting sold, when you're the seller, you're in control. When you're in the buyer, I have, at least two of my married friends, they got a house, and, because of the market that we're in, they ended up paying more for the house than what it's worth. And so, to really distill it down as best I can, when you're spending, you ultimately have to pay more for the same things, because if there's more money in the money supply, everything starts to cost more, because you have to pay more for the same value that something is worth. It ultimately puts downward pressure on economic growth, because people have to take the money that they would otherwise spend on everything else, like living expenses, like rent, food, clothing, groceries, cars, entertainment. Everything else becomes more expensive, and so people take less risk. They open fewer businesses. They put less money into their existing business. All sorts of things happen, and it just goes downward from there. So you essentially have to make more to spend more, and that's really hard if you had a low-paying job or you don't have a lot of transferable skills, upward job mobility. It really wreaks havoc on people's lives. So the best thing you can do is preserve your assets, invest in strong commodities, and invest in things that have proven long-term market value, things like land, property, precious metals, art, real estate, things like that. Those things are proven winners, and it's really smart to be using your money the best way that you can these days. I'm not a financial advisor, so I won't give financial advice, but if I were one, I would be doing the things that I just listed. So the technocratic elites. I'm a firm believer in any platform that gets created, that is out there, that people want to use. It's popular, it's easy to understand, there's more people going to it. We should have a world and a system where anything that people want to partake in is what they get to enjoy. I fully believe in entrepreneurship and, innovation, and people who have a good idea should have the freedom and the opportunity to try it out and see how it goes. I also believe that, I know some people will agree with me on this, other people will disagree, but I believe that if a company is a private company, they can decide whether or not they want to shut someone down. Obviously, there are protections against that. People can't do that on the basis of race or gender or religion, things of that nature. We do have those protections for really good reasons, and I want that to stay that way. And if companies ever are discriminating against others for religion or personal religious views, then or race or gender, we obviously have to put a stop to that. But we can't have a world where innovation and freedom is not allowed. I'm all for competition. Everything that we're doing with Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Google's not really social media, but obviously they own YouTube, so it's essentially the same thing. Pinterest, I appreciate these companies and the services and platforms that they provide, but we can't have a world where people don't have the freedom to start new platforms if they don't want to. If they want to, rather. If you have a platform and you own it and people want to use it, that's great. If you have a platform that people want to use and your platform skews in a particular political direction, I don't think that's so great, because you're essentially creating the same types of problems that people often complain about. People talk about falling into rabbit holes of political division and being in a world where people get siphoned into these social media discussions and beliefs where they're not open to other ways of thinking. Well, the way that happens is when you ban other people from using your platform. If you're truly a free speech, open-minded platform, you would understand and support the fact that people disagree. A fundamentally healthy sign of any society is that people can disagree and still be civil with each other. So it's not a good thing when people are creating a platform and saying we want to get rid of, they're putting disagreement under the guise of extremism and just differences of view and anything that's ultimately political language. People have to be honest and say this is a platform for people who think this way. But if they say that, then they're coming right out and saying, well, only people of this political viewpoint can use our platform. Well, if other people create a platform and it's kind of in opposition to that, you shouldn't be surprised that people did that, because it's just signifying that you're not being as open-minded and as inclusive as you purport to be. And that's a really big issue, because everyone should be free to talk with each other. You can obviously choose who you don't want to talk with, but you should have just as much freedom to choose who you do want to talk with. So I'm firmly of the belief that as competition with social media platforms and just media platforms in general increases, we're going to see people of very different political stripes and mindsets all coming under one roof. I feel like Anomaly is a great example of that. I feel like Tim Pool is a great example of that. I've really started to enjoy, Chrissy Meyer and Blair White, and Gothix usually has some really good content as well. These are just some off the top of my head. there's many more. Again, the Reason Roundtable, I feel like the guys and gals over at Reason do an excellent job of covering a wide variety of content from different perspectives too. They don't always agree with each other, and I find that fantastic because that is where real discussion happens. So, the technocratic elites only have as much power over you as you give them. If you're of the mindset that you don't want people to have, power over you in any way, then either get off the platform or create your own. I'm not saying that you can't use Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google, all these things, but I've found the more I've shifted away from some of these platforms and used them less, things have gone really well. And I really like that about just not only my mental state, but it's a lot easier for me to not feel like I'm going head to head as often with family or friends. And I see less of people's opinions. I see more of the news and just facts and reports. And I still care about people's opinions. I still learn a lot from people's opinions. But it's not at a point where I feel like I'm suffocating under the weight of the social media world, if that makes sense. I think as long as you've got a balanced diet of you're consuming, well-rounded content, you're not consuming heavily biased content like Fox or CNN every day, you have a worldview, you understand the news in the context of your worldview, you know what you think and why you think it, you can defend your own positions, and you like talking with friends and family when it's healthy and appropriate to do so about these things, then I think you're good to go. I don't think there's any issues with being in the political sphere as long as you are honest, you are reading every day, you're giving yourself good content to digest, and you really care about you care about people and the outcomes of what people have to deal with. And by the way, you can care about people and still be an independent or a libertarian as well. I think some of the people who care about other people the most are independents and libertarians because they recognize, hey, I want people to do well, and so I want there to be a world without taxation and income burdens, and I want to get rid of inflation, I want to get rid of the Fed, I want to get rid of monetary systems that oppress people and make it difficult for people to pay their bills, and I want to give people everything they've earned. And I want to live in a world where people get to they get to receive the results of their own decisions and the responsibilities that everybody has whenever they wake up to live their life. That's ultimately how we learn, and it's how we grow into healthy and mature individuals. So with that, I think I'm going to close out this video for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. If you end up watching this later, I apologize for some of the interruptions and blips. Obviously, while I'm doing this, driving has to come first, and it always does. But thank you for watching, and hope to see you in another episode. Check us out on the web at biggerheartsdeeperminds.com and everywhere else that we make content. Thank you very much.